humans have an innate drive to solve problems and understand things, to know things, and I think that's the origin of it. Things like what's out on the ocean beyond where we can see, or what's over that hill, and try to understand things and know things. Look, for example, primitive man probably experimented with spears and canoes and things like that, and the evolutionary advantage of that kind of trait is obvious, and I think that's actually what's behind it. So you can't really explain it in terms of something else. That's an innate drive, I believe. But what inspires me is, I guess, the nature of the problem that I'm trying to solve. For example, if it's an important problem, or if it's an open problem that other researchers have tried to solve, then there's a sort of competitive pleasure out of solving something that other people have tried to solve and failed at. There's a competitive streak in everyone. That's the same thing whether you're playing ping pong or checkers or watching sport on TV. So that's quite a healthy kind of thing, and there's a bit of a thrill in solving something that other people have missed. So it's really the nature of the problem, I think, that inspires me. With me, it always happens during an attempt to solve a problem. Things don't spontaneously come into my mind in some magical fashion. I know that might happen with some people, and there are examples of that sort of thing, but it always stems from trying to solve a problem for me. And I have a kind of a way that I approach problems that I find helps. For example, I'll have a problem and then I'll try to strip it down to the most essential problem without any of the peripheral stuff around it. And I will ignore what other people have done in their solutions or attempted solutions. And so that'll enable me to think about the problem in the most general way possible. And that sometimes has enabled me to come up with solutions that are quite different from the sorts of things people have done before. So, yeah, for me, it's always during problem solving. I generally try to avoid being overly precious in setting up the environment for doing something, because if you do that, then that enables you to make excuses. Oh, I can't do that now because things aren't just right. And I remember reading many years ago that Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes stories, that he had trained himself to be able to write under any circumstances, like in the rain or sitting at the cricket, things like that. And I like that kind of no-nonsense approach. But it must be said that, as I'm sure everyone knows, just about everything that's worthwhile in life comes about as a result of hard work. And you can't be sweating away thinking really hard about complicated stuff for a long time if there are people around you making loud staccato noises that'll interrupt your thinking. So sometimes I get up and I grab a pen and a pad and I go off to some different floor in the building and find a portion of the building that's unoccupied, and I'll sit there in a chair with no one else around and have a pleasant time completely without any distractions and concentrate on whatever it is. So, yes, sometimes that helps. Other times, maybe going for a walk or even lying in bed before you go to sleep. Things like that might help to strip away some of the distracting thoughts, and that'll help you. Other times, perhaps I'm having an enthusiastic back and forth discussion with a coworker, and the intensity of thought during that exchange will help me to come up with something. So that's about it. But basically, no routine, and I try to do things, without any carefully controlled environment. I've been on the CA Patent Review Board for several years, and I've seen a lot of the mistakes that people make. So the second thing I'll say is probably the most important tip for people, but the first thing is the biggest mistake that people can make. So the mistake people make, or the thing you should try to avoid, is tackling a well-known standard problem that's outside your area. So, for example, if you tackle some computer science problem or some well-known problem in, cryptography or authentication, even a way of authenticating onto your cell phone, or some database problem about big data, distributed consistency or whatever. Well, you're competing, if this isn't right in your area, and even if it is, you're competing with thousands of professors in universities and grad students and researchers in very big companies with huge research departments. And these people are spending 8 hours a day hammering away at these problems. And even if you're just as smart as them, if you've got a real job like someone at CA, you're only spending about half an hour a day on the average on research. The rest of the time you're required to do all sorts of more mundane activities like answer emails and things like that. So it's very unlikely that you're going to crack one of these problems and beat out all of these professors and researchers who are hammering away all day. So don't tackle those problems. So here's the second point, which is, I think, the positive thing that you should do. And that is, you should tackle the problems that arise during your work, like the product or whatever you work on at CA. Tackle those problems. Think about what's new and what's important and what's creative that you and the other guys have done in your product. And that way, you'll work on something that's an important product, and that's a satisfying thing to do. And also, you'll be working in your area, and you'll be tackling problems that all the computer science professors never even thought of. So that's what you should do. And I think there are a couple of other things I could mention. One is that if you're new to this game, and you think you might have an idea, find someone else in your building, or a nearby CA building or whatever, who's had experience with doing inventions, and go and run your idea by them and get their input. So there are all sorts of things you have to learn, like the difference between a good product idea and an invention. They're very different concepts, and a lot of people just don't understand that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't really understand what patentable inventions were before I started out on this. It's like if you were going to learn the piano or the violin and you hadn't learned a musical instrument before, would you just try to figure it out all by yourself? Well, no. You go to a teacher and you get the benefit of 500 years of accumulated wisdom. Well, go and find an experienced inventor and get him or her to give you some tips on your idea. The last thing I'll say is, don't be daunted by this. There's a tendency to think, oh, inventions and patents, they're for other people. There's some kind of big league of other people, and I could never do that. But that's probably not true. It's much easier than you might think. So take that step of talking to someone else and have that confidence to give it a shot. What I like most about being an inventor is, well, you'd have to break it down into your first patent and your later patents. I think that for your first patent, I must admit, there's a little bit of an ego boost out of getting your first patent, and like, hey, I got a patent awarded, and oh, honey, you're wonderful, that sort of thing. But after the first patent, that never really mattered at all. And I think it's just the biological reward mechanism from solving a problem that I mentioned earlier on in the first question. I think that's what it is. There's nothing else. I mean, I'd like to say, well, I love the money, the fame, the power, etc., that comes from inventing. But that's not true. It's just the pleasure you get from solving some problem, and that's what it is. I'm sure some people will say, "Oh, I get a wonderful, noble feeling from having helped humanity to evolve to a higher level." But I mean, let's face it, they'd be exaggerating if they were saying that.